Good afternoon. Pleased to be joined on a very solemn occasion by George Mason University Vice President Paul Alvin. Paul, thank you for joining us. And Lieutenant Aaron Weeks from our Major Crimes Bureau. Dr. Michael Bushman, 59 years old, long list of credentials and lifetime achievements that are beyond impressive. The chair of the Department of Bioengineering and Nanomedicine at George Mason University. He hails from Montreal. He earned his PhD from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology in medical engineering and medical physics. He did his postdoctoral work in Switzerland. His research has served to launch 4 biotech startup companies. And this list of lifetime personal achievements and contributions to our community locally, nationally, and I dare say internationally, goes on and on. Dr. Bushman was stabbed to death inside of his Vienna home last evening by his 26-year-old son, Axel Bushman. And Axel is A-X-E-L. Axel Bushman, 26 years old, is being charged with second-degree murder. Lieutenant Weeks will go into some additional details. He's now being treated for his wounds at a local hospital. Since 2021, and I know I've said this before, but I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that we've had 6 homicide victims in Fairfax County since the beginning of 2021, 6 who have been murdered by their sons, their adult sons, inside their homes. And if you add an adult sister killed by her adult brother, that number comes to 7. 7. So that's something that continues to plague the community. And I've spoken anecdotally about the reasons and the despair and the isolation and the family dynamics surrounding COVID and the way we have been living as a society for the past couple of years. And I don't know to what degree that played a case here, but in the event that the logical question is why, that we're thinking really hard about that. The George Mason University community, a big part of Fairfax County, obviously, begins, I think, Paul, the 50th anniversary celebration beginning in April. So I know Dr. Bushman meant so much to not only our community, but George Mason and in the international academic and research world. We offer our condolences to the family, to the community. Lieutenant Weeks will now describe how we got this call for service and the actions we took last night and where we are with our continuing investigation. But again, the son is being charged with second-degree murder. So I'll turn it over to Lieutenant Weeks, and she'll turn it over to Vice President Allman, and then we'll answer questions.
Thank you, Chief. We're here under terrible circumstances. Yesterday evening, approximately 5:30 p.m., the Fairfax District Station responded to several calls for service. Multiple community members called in stating they had seen an individual walking down the road covered in blood. When officers arrived on scene, they did locate the man. They created a dialogue with him and walked along with him towards the town of Vienna. In doing so, during that conversation, he did discard what we later found out to be a knife, and he continued that conversation. Officers were eventually able to have a conversation with him, and he sat down, and he was ended up being taken into custody, not custody, but he ended up being taken to the hospital because he had multiple lacerations to his neck, and he was covered in blood. At the hospital, they were able to verify the man's identity as Axel Bushman. He's 26 years old. Police responded to his address, which is located in the 9800 block of Palace Green Way in Vienna, for a welfare check based on some statements he had made. Officers, when they arrived on scene, officers located, looking through the window, they were able to see 2 feet laying on the ground. Officers made entry into an unlocked door in the home, and they unfortunately came across the tragic across Dr. Michael Bushman, who's 59. He was unresponsive. He was pronounced deceased on scene. detectives from Major Crimes Bureau, our crime scene, our technical investigative unit, as well as other entities on the police department responded out to this address. He was charged, Axel Bushman was charged with second-degree murder. He is currently, as the chief said, he is currently in the hospital, and he will be taken into custody at that point as soon as he's released from the hospital. At that point, I will release it or hand it over to Vice President Alvin.
So good afternoon. My name is Paul Alvin. I'm the Vice President and Chief of Communications for George Mason University. And I want to start by saying on behalf of the university, thanks to the Fairfax County Police Department for their work on this. We are, crushed and anguished by this shocking news of Professor Bushman's tragic death. And he was an eminent scholar. He was recruited here in 2017. He did chair the bioengineering department at our College of Engineering and Computing. Of most note, much has been said about him already. He was very recently working on technology that would make mRNA vaccines, like the COVID-19 vaccine we all have, less costly, with fewer side effects, and more widely available to the world. So we did lose a great mind, a great teacher, and by all accounts, a good and decent human being. As you can imagine, the priority of the university now is with those whom he left behind. And so this morning, the leadership of the university started to gather with the faculty to make sure that their well-being is tended to, and those who he taught and those who he worked with are the ones we are working with now. And the wider university is just now starting to learn of this tragedy. And so our request to the community is for your support, but also while we process, just for some forbearance and a little grace and a little distance to be able to process this. This is a lot for a university. This isn't something that happens every day. And so other than that, we will leave this in the good hands of the Fairfax County Police, and we will tend to those whom he left behind. And in time, we will have an announcement. We will have more to say about how we will, as a community, mourn his death, celebrate his life, and reflect upon his contributions. So that's all we have to say for today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions, Sierra?
Chief, of course, this is still under investigation, but any motive in mind at this time?
No, none that we can speak of. But as you said, the investigation's ongoing. Terrible tragedy, and we hope to get to the point where we share motive. A dispute took place, and a life was lost. And our Victim Services Division, as they always do, is with other members of the family right now, and with the university, and we're coordinating our efforts to take care of the survivors. But we'll get to motive, hopefully, and share that when we get it, Sarah.
And you said dispute, so there was some sort of argument.
That's a possibility. That's one of the possibilities. I imagine something occurred before the fatal stabbing occurred, so that's just a little speculation on my part. But our investigation will get to the bottom of it, like it always does. It's closed by an arrest, but that's not good enough. We want to figure out why, and then we want to work with the broader community to find out ways to do the impossible, to put our nose under the tent and get inside people's homes. And by get inside people's homes, I mean that figuratively, to see what we can do about ongoing family disputes before they turn deadly, because that certainly is a trend and a pattern locally and probably nationally.
And around that time, we had heard a dispatch call saying a father was harassing them. Not sure if it was Axel who called 911 or who it may have been, but do you know if there was a back and forth between the father and son in regards to being stabbed?
Yeah, I don't know those details, and I'll glance over at Lieutenant Weeks if she wants to fill it in. But if we don't know that, we can find out and get back to you. I watched a good portion of the body camera footage when we got that call for service for a man with no shirt, armed with a knife, with blood on his torso and a significant amount of blood. Our police officers, and we just spoke to the Board of Supervisors about de-escalation and time and distance. Our police officers did an outstanding job communicating with this man armed with a knife as he walked down the street. And they used time and distance, and it was kind of a moving, dynamic de-escalation, best I've ever seen, or one of the best I've ever seen. But he was armed with a knife, and police officers, one of the veteran officers, police officer Manthe, I don't know if he's an MPO, but he was a veteran police officer, was talking to him the whole time, and he eventually dropped the knife, and we were able to safely bring him into custody. But that could have been something else, very, very easily.
Was
Paul Wagner.
his wounds, Axel Bushman's wounds, self-inflicted?
That's certainly a possibility. We're not there yet with a conclusion on the nature of his wounds, Paul. He's being treated for those wounds right now. We don't know yet, but that's certainly a strong possibility.
And what's the history of calls of service to the house?
Well, the family's only lived in Vienna since 2017, I believe. George Mason recruited them, came down in 2017 or so.
He came to George Mason. I don't know how long he's lived there.
Yeah, I think the information I have preliminarily is the family's been here since 2017. I think before that they were in Massachusetts, and before that they were in Montreal. I think Dr. Bushman, Professor Bushman, and his wife actually met at MIT. So they haven't been here very long. I think we have one call for service at the home in Fairfax County.
And what was that?
But just that, do we want to describe? You want to describe that? Do you know anything about it?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, police responded in 2019 for one call for service. It had nothing to do with a domestic-related incident, but we are aware of that incident.
And maybe Mr. Alva can answer this. I understand the family lost another son tragically years ago. Is that correct?
I don't have any information on that, I'm sorry.
That is part of our investigation as well. Being so short into it, we are looking into just gathering all the history having to do with the family, as we normally do in these type of cases.
You know anything about that one?
We are aware of something similar, but like I said, we're still trying to investigate that and confirm all information.
Something similar in, what do you mean by similar?
So the loss of a son, we're aware that the other son lost his life, and the details of it, we're still attempting to determine what they were, but not similar to this particular incident.
Not
And lastly,
domestic,
Pardon,
not
sir?
domestic.
No, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Chief, speak a little bit more about the stat that you gave us a minute ago about how many adult children have been involved in the murders of their parents. I think I covered one just a few months ago with the.
Yeah, I wish I could with eloquence, but all I know is what the statistics and circumstances tell us here in Fairfax County, and we have a high disproportionate number of our crimes of violence, our homicides that occur indoors, and it's adult family member on adult family member, and in particular, since 2021, it's been an adult child and an aging parent. Now, 59 is not old, but we've had some of our homicide victims in their 70s in the past year who died at the hands of their adult children. So the approach that I think we have to take as a society is to determine if we're doing enough with intervention. Are we doing enough with our mental health providers and the services we provide people who are in crisis? And I'll say, our commitment to co-responders in Fairfax County is strong. The Board of Supervisors just made a budgetary commitment to us, or is on the verge of making a budgetary commitment to us, so we can add several more crisis intervention trained officers to our co-responder program. So co-responders is alive and well here in Fairfax County. We're in phase 1. It's going to get bigger and stronger and better over time. But we need to do more of it, and I'm sure that need extends beyond the borders of Fairfax County.
And where was Mrs. Bushman?
She wasn't at home at all. I don't know exactly where she was, but she was not at home at the time of this murder.
Is it just the mother, father, and son who lived in the home?
Preliminarily, I believe that's the case.
Can you describe the knife, Chief?
No, it was, I don't know that I have an exact description of it, but it was a fixed blade with a handle, and the blade was several inches. It was a substantial knife. It was not a pocket knife.
It was obvious he was holding it while they were trying to de-escalate.
So when our police officers arrived in response to the call for service, our the son, Axel, had no shirt on. Looks like he had a pair of blue jeans on. He was covered in blood. And he was carrying, it looks like a jacket or a sweatshirt of some type. And underneath the jacket or the sweatshirt, he was armed with a knife. And the call for service described Axel as being armed with a knife. So our police officers were treating it that way. And they did an unbelievably great job de-escalating, talking to him, using his first name, using the police officers using their first names. It was textbook. It was textbook, because that could have had a tragic ending as well. So again, I've said it all the time. We've come a long way in public safety and in law enforcement, and the way we deal with people in crisis now relies heavily on our ability to use time and distance to our advantage.
Do you know how many stab wounds Axel has and how long he may be in the hospital? Like, are they really severe?
I know the father, our victim, Dr. Bushman, Professor Bushman, has several. He died of several stab wounds. And the 26-year-old son, Axel, has at least one significant stab wound that he's being still treated for at a local hospital.
Do you know where?
His torso. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly where.
And are you not sharing a photo of Axel at this point?
I don't know if that's intentional. As I glance over to Anthony, if that's something, we're trying to be cognizant of the family's wishes. He's charged, so I think keeping with our transparent policy and information sharing, I'm looking.
Once he's charged, we'll release the mugshot.
Okay, so he's at the hospital. So we have the warrant. Once he's charged with the warrant, then we'll release it.
As far as Mr. Bushman's stab wounds, were they all over?
LT, you want to general?
They were upper body.
Upper body, okay.
And Chief, in 2020, there was 15 homicides in Fairfax County. 2021, I think it was 21 homicides, 5 so far this year. In your opinion, why is that? Why the uptick in homicides?
Well, I think exactly what I described. If you just look at this mathematically and you look at the number of domestic and then subcategory of domestic adult son on parent homicides, that's what's driving our homicides. So to go from 15 to 21 last year and to have one shy of a third of those murders committed indoors by an adult family member, a son, that's what's driving the homicides. And that's why it's so important that we maintain focused on our commitment to diversion first, our commitment to the co-responder program, treating mental health crises and behavioral crises with the urgency that it deserves. And I think eventually when we share the video of how our police officers took Axel Bushman into custody, you're going to see firsthand the de-escalation model in action. But what's driving the homicides? Very specific answer. Adult sons in some type of crisis killing their parents inside their homes. And this isn't the first stabbing we've had. And stabbings, as you all know, are very personal and often vicious crime scenes. And we've had more than one stabbing homicide in the last now 15 months. Adult son on mom or dad, and on one occasion, an adult sister.
Vice President Paul Alvin, I know you briefly described what Mr. Bushman did at the university, but could you just give any insight to the type of person he was?
What we started hearing this morning, I personally did not have the opportunity to meet him, but what we heard from his colleagues this morning who knew him and were beginning the process of reflecting and remembering, first and foremost was his relentlessly inquisitive nature. Part of what made him such a brilliant scientist was he always wanted to know the answer to the next question, to the point where even Dr. Washington, our president, said, boy, he just kept asking the next question and asking the next question. He was a great teacher. His students, as we understand, really valued his classes and learned from them. He was very excited, as I understand, about this work on helping to make these vaccines cheaper, better, and more available. And so I think, like many of these eminent scientists, they're not just after the science, they're after the human good that comes from those. And this seemed to be that inquisitive nature and then that really intrinsic drive to turn his scientific knowledge into doing good for humanity seemed to be what made him, to know him really was to love him. So.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chief. Good pause at one time.